I'm painting, ballasting, and weathering track in my yard. Oh, not this yard. This yard on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more model railroad tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and subscribe down below and click that little bell icon so you can catch future videos. As I receive suggestions in the comment section of my videos as well as on social media as to things that people would like to see on this channel, two of the most requested items over time have been to see how I paint and weather track and to see some progress in the north yard area of my layout. Well, today I'm going to kill two birds with one stone as I'm going to be painting, ballasting, and weathering the track in north yard. Now, parts of North Yard are not quite ready for ballast yet, as there's some work that's still going on, a little bit of track work that's being adjusted, and some other things. But the classification tracks are all ready to be painted and ballasted, so that's what we're going to be working on today. Do you have some suggestions for techniques that you like to use whenever you weather and ballast track? Tell us about your suggestions in the comment section down below. Now let's head on around the corner to North Yard and we'll get started painting and ballasting some track. Before I started work on the track in North Yard, I used my shop vac to clean the area well. A lot of work has gone on here over the past few months, so there was an array of dust and bits of foam, cork crumbs, and all varieties of debris that needed to be cleaned up to give me a good clean work area. This is very important before you lay ballast because you don't want this debris mixed in with your ballast and permanently glued to your layout. The first step in this process is to paint the track. Now, as I weather this track, I will be applying several layers of paint with different techniques, but I begin by applying a general coverage of paint to color the ties and to prime the sides of the rails. For this, I used Model Master's Railroad Tie Brown and a double action airbrush. I test the paint coverage on a piece of paper first, and then I use the paper to control the overspray so that I don't mar my backdrop or any other models that are on the layout. This layer of paint takes the plastic shine off the ties and covers the silver rail web with a basic color. I apply paint to the sides from about a 45-degree angle and then cover the ties with a straight down pattern. Before painting any turnouts, I protect the points with an about 1/4 inch strip of painter's tape. This protects the contact area between the points and the stock rails for the sake of good electrical contact. I'll hand paint these areas later. With this tape in place, I can simply paint the turnouts just as I do all the rest of the track. After painting the track, when it's just dry to the touch, is an ideal time to clean off the tops of the railheads. If the paint is fresh, a scrap piece of masonite hardboard with the rough side down works well for cleaning the paint off the rails. If the paint is more dry, however, you're going to need something a little more abrasive, like a Bright Boy cleaning bar, to remove stubborn paint. You can also remove the painter's tape from the points of the turnouts at this point, carefully clean all of the rail heads on the turnout, including those of the point rails at this time. With the initial coat of paint dry, the ties are well colored but entirely too uniform to look realistic. To remedy this, I like to paint individual ties randomly, different shades of gray and tan. Notice on this photo how this bit of mainline track shows variety in color in the ties from nearly black to a very light gray. This is the variation that I want to simulate. I used Model Master's light sea gray and dark gray, as well as Vallejo green-brown in various mixtures to get a variety of colors that I was looking for as I applied the colors to the ties as randomly as I could. When the paint was dry, I began ballasting. In most ballast applications, I like to apply my ballast in two stages. The first stage is a darker shade of ballast that I apply outside the ties. This represents older, darker, dirty ballast that's been applied in the past that's now been covered over with fresher layers. I spread full-strength white glue to the ground between the track, in the case of a yard like this, and sprinkle the ballast into it. In a yard, I like to use fine black ballast, in this case Woodland Scenic's cinders. I spoon the ballast on and spread it into the glue. Here's one tip that I use with fine Woodland Scenic's ballast. When spreading with a brush, static electricity tends to build up on the brush bristles and the ballast begins to stick to the brush. Keep a dryer sheet handy and rub it on the brush whenever the ballast begins to stick. It will help reduce the problem of static cling. After applying the dark ballast, I want to reclaim the loose ballast that didn't stick into the glue. To do this, I use an old stocking in the end of my shop vac as a filter. I can vacuum up the unstuck ballast and then reclaim it into a container for later use. Work carefully around the turnouts to keep ballast and glue away from the throw rods so that you don't glue the turnout open or shut. Next, it was time to rust the sides of the rails. For this, I used Microlux paint from Mycomark. You could save 10% on Microlux paint or any regularly priced items at Micromark by using the promo code RONSTRAINS upon checkout. You can find details about this in the description down below. I mixed 2 parts rust to 1 part rail brown to get the rust color that I was looking for. I applied the paint to the visible sides of the rails with a superfine micro brush. On the turnouts, I painted all of the rail sides except for the very points of contact between the point and stock rails. On all of the track, I painted the web of the rail and the spike head details with this rust color to bring out the detail in a realistic manner. When this rust color was dry, I applied my main ballast. In this case, I'm using Woodland Scenic's Fine Gray Blend. Again, using a spoon, I sprinkled the ballast between the rails first, then along the ends of the ties on both sides. Be careful not to get too much ballast in between the rails. You can spread it along, but it's easier to add a little ballast where you have too little than it is to move a lot of ballast further down the track. Use a soft brush to pull the ballast along to the right fullness between the ties. Then rub your finger along the tops of the ties to remove the grains of ballast from the tops and from the sides of the rails. Nothing ruins the look of good track work like a big grain of ballast stuck unnaturally to the side of the rail. I use the brush and my finger to shape the ballast along the sides of the rails between the tracks. Here you can see the small particles of ballast on the rail sides and the tie tops. A stiff brush or a toothpick are good for removing this ballast from unwanted places. This is a job you'll need to repeat after applying the glue to the ballast. With the ballast removed from these unwanted spots, the track looks very realistic. When you're ready to glue your ballast down, start by applying 70% isopropyl alcohol to the ballast. The IPA has a very low viscosity and low surface tension, so it serves as a flow agent that helps pull the glue through the ballast without disturbing the ballast. Notice I'm applying the IPA to the rails and allowing it to flow down the ties into the ballast. This helps keep the IPA from disturbing and washing away the ballast. Apply the alcohol until everything is clearly wet. Then you can apply the glue in the same way. I'm using Woodland Scenic's Scenic Cement, but diluted matte medium is virtually the same thing and works just as well. I've also tried diluted white glue, but I was not happy with the results as it tends to leave a skin and a shine to the ballast. Apply the glue until the entire area is saturated. Any switches near the glued area should be protected. Soak up any excess glue with a paper towel and throw the points back and forth repeatedly as the glue dries to make sure that they don't get glued in place. One thing to note, if you're using Woodland Scenic's ballast, though it looks like rock, it's actually made from ground up walnut shells. Woodland Scenic's is based in Missouri, only about an hour from me, and walnuts are quite plentiful and inexpensive. Notice in this close-up that you can see a few grains of the ballast float up in the glue as it is applied because the walnut shells float. This means that you will need to pick some of the grains of ballast from the ties and the sides of the rails after the glue has been thoroughly applied. When the glue has been applied, the ballast will look like a milky swamp, but fear not, it will dry clear and look very realistic. Before the glue dries, use your brush or toothpick to remove any particles of ballast from the ties, the rail webs, or other unwanted areas. As the glue dried, I used a couple of pieces of rolling stock to make sure that no ballast was stuck in places that would interfere with the wheel flanges. It's helpful to run a fingernail along the insides of the rails to make sure that there are no grains of ballast in places that are going to cause derailments or bumps for your rail cars. I also used the scrap of masonite to rub away any glue residue from the tops of the rails before it had completely dried. Special care must be taken in ballasting turnouts. I ballast along the outside of the track first, again taking care to keep ballast from interfering with the throw rod. When ballasting between the rails of a switch, I use very little ballast in the area of the point rails. Take extra care to keep it off the ties where it would interfere with the movement of the points, and throw the switch several times to make sure there's no interference. When I'm ready to glue the ballast in place, I work slowly with extra care to only use as much glue as I must have, and to work to keep it away from the point rails and the ties where they might get glued open or shut. The important thing is to remove as much extra glue as possible with a paper towel and keep the points moving as the glue dries in order to keep them from being glued to the ties. And I keep working in this manner until the ballast is all applied. This is one job where it pays to take your time, make sure everything looks right before you walk away. When the ballast is dry, it should be pretty much rock solid. At this point, I like to weather the track to show oil drippings between the rails. I do this by airbrushing a wash of 10% oily black paint and 90% IPA in a light coat between the rails. I also like to weather with some rust along the outsides of the rails on the tie plates. Again, using 10% rust color and 90% IPA in a quick pass along the outside of the rails, I leave that nice rusty dropping look along the tie plates. Once again, I use that scrap of masonite to clean away any paint residue from the tops of the rail heads. For the finishing touches, I add some weeds between the tracks and some spillage. Weeds can be added with beads of white glue or by applying a more general area of weeds and adhering it with scenic cement. I did some of both in this area using Woodland Scenic's burnt grass colored fine ground foam. Rail yards will nearly always have some spillage from cars in between the rails in places. To simulate this, I used some white and yellow fine flowering plant ground foam from Woodland Scenics. Again, I shook it out in very light applications and glued it down with scenic cement. When I was finished, I vacuumed up the excess ground foam. I was able to complete this half of the classification tracks in North Yard for this video, and I'm continuing to work down the yard in the same manner. I think that when finished, this process is going to produce a very realistic looking set of yard tracks that I'm going to enjoy operating on for years. I am really pleased with how the ballast and the weathering of the track in North Yard so far is coming together. I'm continuing to work through the classification tracks, and I'll be sure and show you more as we get more of that work done in North Yard, but I'm really pleased with the way that it's looking so far. Well, hey, I want to take a moment to remind you about the Down and Dirty Weathering Contest version 2 going on right now. I've had a number of people who have declared their intention to enter into the contest, but only a couple of videos that have been uploaded so far. I'm expecting a lot more, but the contest is going to be drawing to a close in just a couple of weeks. So if you are planning to weather a car and get a video up for the contest, be sure and get it in by the deadline. That is midnight on Sunday, March 3rd. You want to make sure and get your car done and get your video up so you can have an opportunity to win that grand prize of a $100 gift certificate from Midwest Model Railroad, our great sponsor. If you'd like to know more about the contest, or if you'd like to see the videos that have already been uploaded in the contest, then be sure and check out the playlist in the card right here in the corner of your screen right now. Before you go, be sure and check out the description down below. There you're going to find my MicroMark promo code that can save you 10% on all regularly priced items at micromark.com. You'll also find my Amazon page and my Amazon Pick of the Week, as well as my Patreon page, and links to where you can connect with me on social media. Well, I hope you'll join me again each Tuesday as I bring you more great model railroad videos, and I look forward to seeing you then. Lizzie?